Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's show, we got to hear from the two newest members, officially newest members of the Bucks, at their press conference earlier on Tuesday, and some very interesting words from Doc Rivers and Jon Horst as it relates to the coaching staff. We finally got some of those answers, and the philosophy and strategy for building out the rest of this roster. Some interesting things that Jon Horst shared with us earlier in the day. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, as well as some of you are joining us on the live stream of today's show. That is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, on Tuesday, Camille, we had the introductory press conference for the two newest members of the Bucks via the draft, A.J. Johnson and Tyler Smith. And I don't know that we learned a whole lot about that duo, as it seemed like the most interesting nuggets to come from this press conference today had to do with Doc Rivers' coaching staff and with the makeup of this roster and the thoughts on how to round that group out from Jon Horst. So we'll start with the coaching staff piece, a question that you and I have brought up quite a bit in the offseason here. Others have pondered as well. Who's the actual staff? Like, we kept seeing these names added. We knew about some subtractions that were made earlier in the offseason, but as you saw more names added, as you saw Darvin Ham rejoined the Bucks, the addition of Greg Buckner as well, who may not be the lead assistant in Milwaukee, but he was more than the lead assistant in Cleveland. He was the associate head coach for JB Bickerstaff. You started to wonder, okay, there have to be more names that are exiting, and that was confirmed. So Patrick Mutombo, Trevor Gleason were the other two names that we learned will not be a part of the staff. So as it sits, I was going to say right now, but I think this is it, right? I don't see any other changes. The quote-unquote assistants, the guys that are going to be sitting in the first row on the bench, are Darvin Ham as the lead assistant, Dave Yeager and his obviously long history with Doc Rivers, and that other name that we mentioned, Greg Buckner, that's going to be your front row next to Doc Rivers. Everybody else is going to be in that second row, and that includes some of the holdovers, Vin Baker and Joe Prunty. So Bucks fans can breathe a big sigh of relief that, yes, Joe Prunty, just as Doc Rivers talked about last year when he took over, you get, in this situation, when you inherit a staff, you get to know guys, and you find one or two guys that stick, that you may not have had a relationship with, you never worked before, but you just kind of find that you mesh and you click, and it's pretty apparent that's Joe Prunty. And it seemed like that was going to be the case from the start.
Yeah, Joe Prunty just came off as somebody who Doc really did click with immediately. I mean, part of it was necessity, right? Coming into a new situation, Joe Prunty was a voice that could kind of catch him up, get him up to speed, and kind of help translate between what Doc was looking to do and what the team was already doing as well. So really happy to see that Joe Prunty is still around, given the fact that he's been, interim head coach for this team twice, two different stints right there. So yeah, love to see that Prunty is here. Ben Baker, another name that is returning to the staff. That's good to see with the ties that he's had to the team as well. And like you mentioned, we thought that there might be some more coaching changes coming, because when Doc took over and brought some of his guys on initially back in February, I think it was like 11 assistant coaches at that time. And he was like, this is nuts. Like, this is too many guys. Like, I have to figure this out eventually. And if the math is right, I think that number is down to 9 assistant coaches, which, I mean, it's less than 11. It's still a big staff, but I do think part of him having that larger staff goes into something that we kind of threw around, I think last week with the draft and everything like that, which is maybe there's more coaches on the staff now that are experienced as well to kind of help with that player development piece of the roster. And after hearing some of the things that Doc as well as Horst were mentioning during the press conference with AJ and Tyler, it does seem like that is something the Bucks are really looking to lean into. So the makeup of the staff makes some sense to me, especially with Doc just mentioning the fact that he thinks this might be one of the best staffs that he's ever had because he loves having guys with previous head coaching experience, and he has that on this staff as well, plus just some really experienced guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine there's been a better staff that Doc Rivers has been a part of, and it might be the best staff in the league. It's certainly up there when you think about Dave Yeager with his experience as a head coach, Joe Prunty with a couple of interim head coaching stints that he had there. We mentioned Greg Buckner was the associate head coach for JB Bickerstaff in Cleveland, and oh, by the way, Darvin Ham, who was a trusted lead assistant for years under one of the best coaches in the league, and Mike Budenholzer, and then a head coach of his own. So this right up there, and it's a complete 180 over the conversation that we were having about the Bucks bench in terms of coaching staff a year ago.
It is. Yeah, we were so curious to see how a first-time head coach would build out his bench and what that would look like. And now we're seeing what a very experienced head coach is looking to do for his own staff. He did also mention that Pete Dominguez would be coaching the summer league team, which I thought was really interesting. And he said a lot of our skill development guys will be the assistants for summer league. So if Bucks fans are curious as to who on the staff is seen as being some of the skill development players, just like, who are those guys who are going to be really key for player development? Summer League is going to have a really good picture of that because Doc said he's putting those guys as the assistants, so you can get a better look there as well.
And that's going to be a big piece for the Bucks, obviously, throughout Summer League, training camp, the preseason, getting a look at that as well. But as we started to hear from Jon Horst and, to some extent from Doc Rivers as well, that is going to be a piece throughout the regular season. It is, I think, what Bucks fans have clamored for at least the last year when we talked about a number of times, hey, this is the first time in a while the Bucks have had multiple young players to develop and get some minutes to. It's not just Dante DiVincenzo. It's not just Malcolm Brogdon or Thon Maker that you're looking at. You have a number of these guys, and especially with the two additions they made at the draft, which we'll get to in a second here, two more pieces that you're going to need to develop. Stanley Amude that we talked about on yesterday's show, another piece that you would look at to develop. So development really was the theme of what we heard in that press conference earlier on Tuesday. I do want to get to some of those comments from Jon Horst, especially because those were the most interesting ones. Not only about those young guys, but I think about the philosophy and how the Bucks are going to round out the rest of this roster and how they view that group. So we'll get into that conversation about what the rest of the offseason could look like in terms of roster changes for the Bucks. We already see some comments about suggestions on moves to make. Doesn't seem as though that's in the plans for this Bucks team based on what Jon Horst said earlier in the day. So we'll get to that coming up after the break here as we continue on Locked On Bucks. Well, time to talk to you about GameTime. And look, it's time in the summer. We all take a little time off. You like to go see Major League Baseball games. No better place to do so than with GameTime. It's the easiest way to score tickets to Major League Baseball games across the country. It doesn't just have to be here in Milwaukee. If you're on a trip, if you're going somewhere else, if you have a tour of stadiums you want to check off, GameTime is the perfect app for you. There are last-minute deals where you can find yourself saving up to 60% for sports events, concerts, theater, comedy acts, and more. Flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Most importantly, you see the all-in pricing as well. You can just toggle that feature, turn it on, so you know exactly what you are paying for up front. You know what the prices are, no sticker shock once you get to check out. You can see panoramic views from your seats as well. If you've never been in that venue, a very, very helpful tool when you secure those tickets. Most importantly, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And if you find seats cheaper, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the GameTime app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Development, Camille, was really the theme of what we heard from Doc Rivers, Jon Horst, especially at that press conference. So let's start with the Jon Horst pieces here. We talked about what to expect from the coaching staff. And actually, you mentioned Pete Dominguez is going to be coaching the Summer League. Was he on the front row as well? He may have been.
No, I think he's not front row.
Well, regardless, he's going to be a big piece of the development here. And listening to Jon Horst today, granted, I don't expect Jon Horst to come out and just say, look, here's the blueprint. Here's our plan for what we're going to do. But, you know, we see a lot of comments in here about you got to trade Brook Lopez. We've gone over that the last handful of shows as well, and the pros and cons of doing that. We've talked about the names of Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton. But listening to what Jon Horst had to say today, I'm not saying there is no chance that any of those players are traded, but he kept referencing 6 veteran players that we're bringing back. The holdovers in terms of the young guys that we are going to continue to develop. And he can't talk about DeLon Wright until July 6th, but did indicate, and then 2 extra roster spots. Reading between the lines there, and he talked about the mix of the roster more than anything, that we want to find the right mix of young guys and vets where it's not just we're a young team and there's going to be growing pains and lumps, and maybe you lose games you otherwise wouldn't have because there's no veteran presence. It's not just going to be like last year where I know we talked about the young guys that were there, but you basically played vets. This is the year that we're finding that mix where we think the best way to develop these guys, reading between the lines, is playing them based on everything that Jon Horst said, but also having those vets alongside them. And I think, assuming most of our listeners and viewers here I had a chance to either read or listen to those comments by Jon Horst, I would assume, other than the whole, are these guys going to be traded and how you feel about that, the rest of it, I would guess, is music to their ears.
Should be. It should be. And the interesting thing about Horst saying, like, we have 6 returning core players, I see the comments coming in, and I saw it as well, instant reaction on Twitter as well, with some people being like, why is Pat Connaughton a core player at this point? But I think, too, what Horst was really saying with that is that there are 6 guys on this roster who have shown throughout their careers that they can be valuable members on a playoff team. Now, whether you think that Pat Connaughton's time has come and passed is a different conversation. And even if, yet and still, you don't expect Horst to go up here and say, like, I got 3 of these guys on a trading block right now, based on what we've been reading. Right? Like, he's not going to say that. But I do think what's important to keep in mind is that even if one of those guys is traded, Pat, Bobby, Brook, whatever the case may be, the person coming back is most likely going to be a veteran player as well. Someone else who has shown already that they can play in the league, that they can be good in the playoff rotation, so on and so forth. And that's the piece of it that I really took away from, not the names as much as the construction of the roster itself, which was, as he mentioned, intentional, of having these 6 core guys coming back into the fold. 3, I think he called them young vets or something like that, young veterans, referring to Marjon Beauchamp, AJ Green, and Andre Jackson Jr.
Whoa.
Wait, no, I'm going to get to your guy, because he called those 3 out first, saying, like, these are 3 people who we saw, play last year, contribute last year. We think that they will continue to do so this year. And then there's Chris Livingston, who had a great year last year, has been working really hard this summer, and someone who they now, and someone who they now feel is going to be ready to contribute this year. So that's another body into the mix. And then you have the 2 young guys on the roster with Tyler and AJ, who just got drafted, and they're expected to kind of push the pace a little, push the guys in practice, push. And he mentioned, like, you talk about playoff rotations being like 9 or 10 deep, and you have to have regular season rotations, so on and so forth. Like, we love the mix of guys that we have. And he indicated as well, like, we can add some more vets through free agency. As we mentioned, DeLon Wright can't be announced yet, but has been apparently agreed upon of him coming to Milwaukee, meaning the Bucks would still have 2 open roster spots to use if they want to use it. And those would be for vets as well. But the point remains that the Bucks are going to look to carry 6 different young guys on their roster into the regular season. And that's something that, Justin, when me and you talked before the draft, we were like, doesn't feel realistic.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we've never really seen the Bucks lean that heavily into youth, where it's a championship team. They're going to go and get vets. They'll have a couple young guys on the roster, some 2-ways, and they'll go from that. But what they're looking to do now with this player development piece of it really does seem like they're looking to get somewhat younger and find some young guys that can really break into the rotation. For years, people have been saying the Bucks need to get younger, and it seems like the Bucks are really finally going to lean into that while still trying to compete for a championship, which seems like backwards math to some, whereas normally you think of a contending team, you're seeing vets, you're seeing guys who have proven that they can do this, but it appears like the Bucks have some real confidence in some of the younger guys being able to be valuable rotation pieces, as well as for some of the vets they might be able to sign to contribute as well.
Yeah. So there's a few things off of that. I mean, first and foremost, you mentioned it. We both kind of dismissed. It's probably not going to be a majority of your bench being constructed with this young group. That's why we both kind of assumed maybe one of those guys is used in a trade. Maybe the draft picks are attached to a contract as a sweetener, just because I had a hard time seeing this bench being 50% those young guys that were in their second or third year, or rookie in the case of the 2 draft picks this year. That's apparently not going to be the case. And, I can't help but wonder that we all have those come to Jesus moments where you're pushed to something and just, all right, something's got to change here. We've said it for years. They got to get younger. They got to get more athletic. Jon Horst and company have known that too. And they've looked at things to do. I know you've used your mid-levels on guys like Joe Ingles. You've traded a million second-round picks for Jay Crowder and PJ Tucker through the years, but they know we do need to get some type of injection of youth and athleticism in this group. It's just easier said than done when you're in a spot that the Bucks are in, and especially when you look at the last couple of years, what was out there, what they could have done with the resources that they had. It's much easier to just find those vets that you feel like, okay, we've seen this guy do it before. This fits with what we want to do. But long story short, I can't help but wonder if that loss to the Indiana Pacers in that first round matchup with them was maybe exactly what the doctor ordered in terms of kickstarting this. Here's how we need to view our roster construction, because you went up against everything we had said for years. You got to get not necessarily as much as the Pacers have, but pieces of this. And you saw what you were up against for 6 games in that first round series. And this team probably isn't going anywhere in the Pacers. They just added James Wiseman, who is a name that I think Bucks fans might have kicked around and said, hey, what if you could get him for the vet minimum? So that team's going nowhere. And I think the other piece was, when you look at the playoffs as a whole, I think you and I talked about this early into the postseason. It felt like, at least early on through the first 2 rounds, the story of the playoffs was youth. When you look at what teams like the Thunder, even the Timberwolves, I know Karl Anthony Towns is a vet at this point, Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley as well, but there's a lot of youth on that Timberwolves team. The injections of youth from the Dallas Mavericks. That, to me, along with going up against a team that's in your division and has all of that, really seemed to kind of hammer home the point and force the hand of the Bucks of, look, we can't stop running from this. We have to embrace this. Even if we don't have the right mix, we have to start to find that mix this offseason.
They have to. I know we're going to talk about some of Doc's comments in the next segment, so he definitely kind of touched on that as well. But I think that Pacers point's a really good one. I believe it was AJ Johnson during the presser who just made a comment. He was like, what do you bring to the team? And I think he said a line of something like, my generation might have to play a little bit faster, so like I can bring that, just that pace to the court. And Tyler Smith kind of laughed and like a little bit like at him saying that. And I was like, man, he just said, y'all old dudes play real slow. Like, I'm here to come and pick up the pace. Joking, of course, but I mean, it's some truth into that, where it's like, we're here to play really fast. And that's something that I know I can bring to the team. So to your point about seeing the Pacers and seeing like just the pace as well as the league landscape in itself, That makes a lot of sense. And if you are looking for young guys, then the question becomes, okay, one, do you believe that the core of vets that the Bucks currently have is good enough to compete for a championship? Do you believe that the young guys on the roster are going to be able to develop into something that is going to be worthwhile? And then I guess the other question would be along the lines of, do you trust Doc Rivers to be the coach of this team when thinking about the Bucks going into next season? It's a conversation I had on Twitter. I believe it was with Mike Zek, a longtime follower, big Bucks fan. And like the three big questions around the Bucks being those three, like, do you trust the core? Do you trust the young guys in the Bucks scouting? And do you believe in Doc Rivers? And depending on how you feel about that, I think will really color how you feel about the team's prospects going into this next season. But you can really see a shift in the Bucks with them trying to be intentional about these young guys coming on. And it seems as if as well, based on what Horst was saying and some things that Doc mentioned as well, if the young guys show that they are ready to play, they will play.
Yeah. And, I mean, we'll get into some of those Doc comments and some of the quote unquote leftovers in free agency in the final segment here. But I mean, that's the other big piece is just as we had the conversation yesterday over show me the Brook Lopez trade that makes you better, right? I'm sure there's trades that make you younger and that make you different, but better is what's most important when you have this type of group whose window is closing. And Giannis is still in his prime, but the other guys are 30 and in their 30s. So you have to constantly get better. When you look at what's out there, not official, it won't be official until Sunday, but the DeLon Wright signing, as we talked about, a very good value signing. And I think universally it has been praised and met very highly across the league, talking heads and other people, media types across the league saying, hey, it's a pretty good deal for the Bucks. He's going to check a lot of boxes for them, especially if this is the guy that we saw in Washington a couple of years ago. Then it's a really good signing to get on the vet minimum. But everywhere else, what's the value that's out there, right? It goes back to that conversation with Brook about Brook of, okay, who's going to play center if you trade him for a smaller player? Oh, just sign somebody. Okay, who? I know the Bucks were linked to Daniel Tice, and to be clear, I know I mentioned that name early in the offseason too. I don't mind Daniel Tice. I don't mind him as your fourth big, but as your starting center, that's where you're going to have problems, and that's kind of the spot the Bucks would be in that you can't help but feel if you were to swing some trade that involved Brook Lopez. It just seems like you'd be painting yourself into a corner.
Yeah, because to your point, you're trying to get better, not just younger, not just trying to, shave off money from your salary cap, because the Bucks are looking to compete. So it's trying to find that right balance. And if there is no trade that makes you better, then there is no harm of rolling into the regular season with what you have and then re-examining the landscape around the trade deadline. There is still time. It doesn't all have to happen in the summer. It can happen during the season as well once the basketball begins up until that deadline. It's like we mentioned on yesterday's show. I can imagine you don't want to see Brook Lopez leave for nothing. If this is his last year in Milwaukee, and it's not going to be, another contract after that, then you want to try to get something back from it. But again, you're competing for a championship. So you're not just trying to get back anything. You're trying to get back something that fits and makes sense. And as we went through everything that Brook Lopez brings to the table, we talked about the shooting, the rim protection, the post game. And it's like we can pick some guys who can give you one or the other, or some guys who give you that just on a lesser scale all around the board. And it's like, is it worth the chance? Like, there's only a few guys that we've even thrown out where I'm like, this one's kind of interesting, where I would lean there. You might take a little step back, but it might be better off for you in the long term. Like we mentioned, Wendell Carter Jr. That's one for me where it's like, I could get on board with that if that's the move to make, especially seeing everything going on in Orlando with all these other bigs getting contracts right now, where it's like, where does that put Carter Jr. for them? But outside of that, like, I just don't see too much out there.
Yeah, and I want to address the core six and some of the other comments that Doc Rivers had. We'll get to that and take a look at what else is out there on the free agency market, any other moves that have happened in the last day or so since we last spoke as well. We will get to that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Well, if you find yourself constantly having to reach for the remote and turn down the volume when you're watching ESPN or Fox Sports because of all of that screaming, it means it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day, bringing you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, and it streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just to clean up a few things, or clarify, I should say, and address some of the comments that we see from the viewers here. When no names, or at least not all the names, were mentioned, but when Jon Horst, and I think it was just John, maybe Doc as well, talked about that core six and the vets that they have: Giannis, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton. Those are the six guys that would fit the bill of vets, as the youngest in that group is Giannis, or actually Bobby Portis. Hard to believe he is actually younger than Giannis, just slightly. And then you have the other guys that are free agents, and by all indications, Jay Crowder, Malik Beasley, Pat Beverly are all no longer going to be a part of the team. Thanasis Antetokounmpo is a free agent. The injury certainly muddies things there, where I would assume he will not be a part of this team next year. And the other names, obviously the young guys, your 2 draft picks this year, which I'm left to assume, I know we pondered this a little bit yesterday, left to assume those are both going to be standard contracts, and it won't be 1 2-way deal there. The DeLon Wright signing is going to be official later this weekend, probably, or next week, once the moratorium lifts on July 6th. And then all those young names that we mentioned: AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr., Chris Livingston's on a standard contract. Remember, it's not a 2-way contract. That leaves you with 2 open roster spots. And I know they did mention the 2 open spots specifically. I wonder what you do for the rest of free agency, because when you look at it, let's say the Bucks fill out the roster, and I think Frank tweeted this earlier today as well with a detailed breakdown, but let's say you add 2 more vet minimums to get to 15 players. That would put you about $6 million over the second apron. So what that means is you only have to carry 14 guys. You don't have to sign 2. If you only add 1, you'd be about $4 million over that second apron number. We've mentioned the cap numbers before. $4 million would be relatively easy, you would think, to get under at the second apron. I do wonder, though, as we've continued to talk about development, if this is something where you look at a guy who may have a year left, a year with an option, and all these names, when we talk about the young guys that you're developing: Marjon Beauchamp, Chris Livingston, basically playing the same spot. Andre Jackson Jr., similar story there. If you see AJ Johnson and Tyler Smith, AJ Johnson's probably an undersized, somebody that needs to bulk up too. Tyler Smith, definitely a 3-4 tweener. So you've got a lot of youth in that spot on the perimeter as basically a 3. That's the spot that Pat Connaughton is going to occupy. That you can't help but wonder, if these guys rapidly develop and you get to a point where we feel like we can lean on 1 or 2 of these guys, we trust them in these minutes. Remember, the second apron, when we talk about that, it's at the end of the year that you are held in that. So the Bucks would have until the last day of the league year next year, June 30th next year, to get out from under that second apron, to get rid of $4 million. That's when you could potentially look at something, whether it's at the trade deadline and moving on from salary, or at the draft. If you then attached a draft pick and said, okay, we're going to move on from this contract if we have the Pistons or a team like that, that again is just going to be the dumping ground for contracts in exchange for some assets. You could do something like that then. It does not have to be before the season starts. But remember, it limits to what you can do throughout the season. So you won't be in the market for any buyout guys that were making more than the mid-level. You obviously can't do any aggregation in trades. I believe you can if it takes you under the second apron. I think we did get that clarification a couple of days ago, but still, long and short of it is we spent so much time focusing on the second apron, and I think we've all had this panic of you got to get under it and you got to do it right now. You have to do it in the next 12 months. And I think that may be the thing we've kind of ignored. And it may be the best route for the Bucks is if we can stay close and just hover around that figure where it's not like we're $12-15 million over and man, we really got to shed some stuff. If you can do that, it makes it much easier to clear that up once the season ends. When you look, we saw the DeJounte Murray trade happening towards the end of the league year and stuff like that. You can still get under the second apron then. And I think that's what makes the development of these young guys, and maybe why we heard some things like that about, hey, we're trying to blend youth and veterans here, why it makes their development all the more important, because ideally you would love one of those guys to just grab the reins here and say, okay, we got to play this guy, and there's no way we're taking him off the floor.
And they're going to get the opportunity to, as we mentioned before, like it was very clear, made by Doc, made by Jon Horst. Like if someone shows us during camp when the ball rolls out and we're playing basketball that they can get on the court and take these minutes, we're going to give it to them. Like there is going to be an opportunity here if you can show and prove. I think it was Doc. I'm just going through some of my notes because he was actually straight up like when it came to AJ Johnson and Tyler Smith, like, hey, are they going to really play this like much at all this season?
Yeah.
And Doc was like, I don't know. We're going to get into the gym. Like we're going to have to go and see. Like, and he mentioned that there's a push and a pull with young guys and vets that he loves, and which is part of why he wanted to make sure to get this particular balance on this team with the vets kind of pulling the young guys along with knowledge, teaching them the game. Like, come on, like I'm going to show you how it goes. And the young guys are pushing because they want to play every night. They're going to be pushing the vets the whole time. So there's going to be a push and a pull throughout the roster. And he mentioned like how much he loves that combo of that push and that pull. And he says up to the young guys, like once we start to practice, once we start to playing and they show us what they can give us, if they can give us something, then, you know, they will be on the court. And we've talked about it before. There's a narrative around that Doc Rivers doesn't like to play young guys. And we mentioned that's false. He has shown when you give him young guys that are talented, he'll play them. And he was asked about some other younger rookies that he's had in the past with Al Jefferson and Mike Miller. And he also mentioned like Tyrese Maxey. And he was like, yeah, they showed.
He's gone out of his way to talk about Tyrese Maxey the last year and a half here.
Yeah. And he's like, I could see it, like you can see it sometimes. And it's like these young guys, they had the character, meaning they wanted to be coached. They wanted to listen. They had that together and they just wanted to be out there and they wanted to play. They wanted to get better and they loved the game. And I think that love of the game piece was so important because he said it kind of like a throwaway, but like the NBA is hard. It's a lot of work. The competition is a lot. And if you don't love this, like it's going to eat you up. Like you have to have a real love for this game. So if anyone can show that, opportunity is there for him. And just to rewind a little bit back to what you said about the second apron, which I think is really important. There's time to get back underneath there. There is time. I think that's really important because this is all new to everybody trying to figure this out. We've been talking about how this is affecting teams and team building. We're like, maybe it's going to be more player development. You're hearing some of these, teams that are around that first and second apron mentioning we got to lean into this a little bit more. So I think that point about there's time is really, really important for Bucks fans and NBA fans to realize, especially if the Bucks can kind of keep that number around what that second apron is.
Yeah. And, just to wrap things up here on the free agency front and some of what we heard from Doc Rivers and Jon Horst on Tuesday, I'm going to be very curious if they do actually sign 2 additional players and if they use that, spot number 15, or if you keep it open. Granted, the Bucks aren't going to have much flexibility and leeway in terms of things that they can do. Can't do something like what we just saw happen earlier on Tuesday with the Warriors trading, I've never seen this before, a second round pick swap and cash. You cannot send out cash when you're in the second apron, but sending that to the Timberwolves for Kyle Anderson. Um, so I do wonder if you're just going to keep it at 14. Hey, that's all we need. That's the minimum requirement. It saves us a little bit more in terms of salary and the ability to get under that second apron. But when you look at the roster as it stands right now, to me, Camille, I just think what would make the most sense for the Bucks would be, I suppose, it really depends on what is out there and what you perceive as value and who can help you. But to me, I would look at this and say, I'd carry 14, and instead of signing two guys, I'd sign one, and that one would be a big. We mentioned the name
Yeah.
of Daniel Tice. Again, if he's your fourth big, it makes sense, I think, and it helps you out there. But just reading through those names, and again, hearing from Doc and Jon Horst earlier today that, hey, these guys are going to play, and hearing them signal out my guy as well and saying, look, he's worked hard, and we think he's reached the point where he can contribute and we can play him this upcoming season. It's creating a log jam out there at a position where we said, man, the Bucks really need to find some guys that can play here on the wing, bigger wings that can defend and give you some youth. Now, all of a sudden, again, the actual play that you get from those guys remains to be seen, but you've all of a sudden got a handful of those bodies that I know we all pointed to. You got to sign bigger wings. But again, it kind of ties into the conversation we had about Brook Lopez. Are you making a trade just to make a trade? Are you signing a guy just to sign a guy when, you may have something at home already? It may not be quite as good, but you may have something there that can fit those needs for you. And that's why I think even if they do sign two guys, unless somebody slips through the cracks and it's, holy cow, they got this player on the vet minimum. And to be honest, when we reviewed some of the names that are out there, I don't even know who that guy would be on the perimeter at this point. I just think you sign one more guy and you sign a big, or if you do sign two, I think you sign a big and you sign another guard.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the next signing I would love to see would be a big. We did see that Xavier Tillman return to the Celtics on a 2-year deal, which makes sense. I mean, we mentioned, I'm not sure if it was on the show or we were just talking just about the Porzingis injury and that he's going to be out for some time. So there is a pathway to more playing time there. Get it for sure. But like a Precious Achiuwa, someone that I still think kind of gives the Bucks what they said they were looking for with the kind of versatile defensive big, would be a really good pickup. And like I mentioned yesterday, I love keeping that 15th roster spot clear, even without salary constraints. I just love the flexibility that comes with it because throughout free agency, we saw it last year with Kelly Oubre and Philly, where it was like they had that spot open. The free agency just kept going on and on. The market changed. He wasn't able to get the contract that he was looking for. So he took a really cheap deal on a 1 year just to see how it went. And to your point, like, I'm not sure who that might be. Like I saw Gary Trent Jr.'s market actually wasn't as robust as he thought that it might be. So it could be somebody along those lines too, where it's like as free agency goes on, someone who you thought was going to get the mid-level doesn't, and they're willing to take that vet man for a year to see how it goes. So I love having that flexibility. I would go for a big as well, just somebody who can kind of be flexible, defensive, and give you a different look than what you currently have. With Bobby coming off the bench, being a bucket, which you need that. You need guys who are going to go out there and score. Bobby's a tenacious rebounder as well for his size. So yeah, I like that idea of getting another big, letting that 15th roster spot just kind of be, unless something comes up where you're like, didn't expect this to be available for us. So now let's take advantage.
Yeah, when you look at the bigs that are out there, we mentioned earlier in the show, James Wiseman signed a 2-year deal with the Pacers. Alex Len, we saw return to the Kings. Obviously, DeAndre Drummond, the first signing this summer. Mo Bamba signed with the Clippers. Jonas Valanciunas goes to the Wizards. Isaiah Hartenstein, the biggest name out there, going to the Thunder. So we've already seen these names. Bol, too, another one that some Bucks fans had said, hey, what about Bol? You've seen a lot of these names start to trickle elsewhere. I think, to me, of the list that you, me, and Frank went over initially over the summer, Tomas Bryant is decent, serviceable. He's still out there. He's a possibility. We mentioned Daniel Tice as a possibility. So that's what you're getting at, right? That it's starting to get pretty thin pretty quickly there on the big man front. So again, all the more reason why Omer Yurtseven too, another guy that maybe carries some intrigue, but it just kind of backs up. I don't see the trade that involves Brook Lopez that is going to make you better. It might check off one box that you're looking for, but I think you trade Brook Lopez at this point, you're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? That you're checking off one thing, but you're exposing yourself to another, and even trying to find guys that could play the four, stretch fours, that you say, well, late in the game we play Giannis at the 5, and this guy plays next to him. Derek Jones Jr. is the anomaly, right? You're not going to find a guy on a vet minimum that you feel like, man, this guy is closing playoff games for us and making important moments and plays throughout the course of the game. You got great value from Malik Beasley in the regular season. But again, you start to see those things of why somebody is available for the veteran minimum. So that to me is going to be one of the very, very interesting parts here is what the Bucks do with those final 2 spots potentially, or that final spot. And again, just looking at what you have and hearing what Jon Horst and Doc Rivers had to say today, I think you're already set on the wing. That listening to that, and you mentioned this as well, listening to what Doc had to say about MarJon at the end of the year, I get the sense you're set here. And what they learned was, man, we were pushed by the Pacers with their athleticism. We have to do the same. We know we might not have that with Brook Lopez and Chris Middleton, but what that means is we have to put that around those guys, that we have to continue to develop these players and get them to the level where they can play in those games in the postseason for us. And most importantly, the other thing that you mentioned as well is pushing guys, right? So in other words, these are the guys, right? Last year, it was basically just Andre, but these are the guys that are pushing the tempo and making us get out and run in practice, in other things that we have in training camp and throughout the season, injecting more of that. That to me was the most important part to hear in that conversation with Doc and Jon Horst earlier in the day.
Yeah, and then I guess I'll just wrap up my final thoughts there, because I think you summed that up really beautifully there. Having that many different wings and possibly having a logjam, it's one of those things to me where it's like, we know how important this is to have. So we have a lot of different options here, and we're just hoping that 1 or 2 of them, at the very least, can pan out for this team. Like, who is going to be the guys that really was able to separate themselves from that group? So that's going to be a really interesting battle to see. Like, I'm really looking forward to Summer League, and I know Summer League basketball turns into some weird things very, very quickly. But I just am really looking to see how these young guys get out there. And again, if someone has a great Summer League performance or a really terrible one, it's always difficult to really judge how that's going to translate, because the role that they're being asked to play is different. They don't have a Giannis on the court or a Dame on the court, which changes the math so much for any NBA team trying to defend them. But it's really just trying to see the confidence, the skill set. How is the game looking for them? Do they look like they've improved from last Summer League that they were in, if they were in one? And for the younger guys who we haven't seen before at all, just how do they hold up? We've mentioned the body shapes and just the need to add on strength. Both rookies on the Bucks have come from programs where they were playing against other professionals, playing against other adults. So it's not necessarily new to them. It's just another level on that for them, and they have to continue to adding on to that. So I'm really excited to see just how that plays out. And even thinking about the 2 new rookies that they have, you mentioned the logjam at wing that the Bucks currently have with MarJon, with Andre Jackson Jr., with Chris Livingston there. And you think about what they drafted, a combo guard and a big, where it's like, if everything worked out in a perfect world for the Bucks, they would kind of have the guys at positions that they need to come up behind some of the more established veterans on the team. So again, it's a big if, a lot of time to go to see how these draft picks pan out, so on and so forth. Again, I was surprised to see the direction that they went in, but after hearing Horst and hearing Doc and just seeing how they're really playing this out, it makes sense to me. I get what they're doing. Now it's just going to come to see, like, did you scout this right? And is this going to pan out for the team?
That's the big piece. Hearing the explanation, you can say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and this makes sense, but you need that continued development from these guys if that's the route that you're going to go. But I think one thing is for certain, that is, this is going to be a very, very anxious time for the summer league, and one that's going to carry a lot of anticipation to see all of these young guys and their development here for the Bucks. So maybe have to do some playback and some watch alongs for summer league games. Who would have thought? We will continue to recap free agency here, see if there's any more moves that we need to react to in the coming days. That'll do it for today's show. We'll be back once again tomorrow. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you then on Locked On Bucks.